There's a quiet kind of pain that deep thinkers carry. It doesn't scream. It doesn't ask for attention. It just lingers silently, like an invisible weight pressing on the soul. It's the pain of noticing too much, of hearing what wasn't said, of feeling what others refuse to feel. You might be at a dinner table. The conversation is light, full of laughter and meaningless chatter. Someone talks about the weather. Another shares the latest gossip. Everyone nods, smiles, plays along. But then you speak. And suddenly, the room changes. You say something real, something honest, something that doesn't fit into the surface-level rhythm they've created. And it doesn't land. No one laughs. No one responds. They shift in their seats. Someone clears their throat. Another says, "Anyway." The moment is gone, but you felt it. That small rejection, that unspoken discomfort. It happens more often than you care to admit. Carl Jung understood this perfectly. He believed that the deeper you go into your own mind, the more alienated you become from the world around you. Not because you're broken, but because the world prefers illusion. It rewards those who conform, who blend in, who nod without questioning, who pretend to be okay even when everything inside them is falling apart. But deep thinkers, they're the ones who don't pretend. They can't, because they see through things, through fake smiles, empty traditions, and hollow systems. Jung once said, "The more intelligent and self-aware a person is, the more they suffer from the general unconsciousness of society." That's not a compliment. It's a warning. Because in a society that doesn't value depth, being self-aware is not a superpower. It's a curse. And that curse starts early. From childhood, most deep thinkers are misunderstood. They ask questions other kids don't. They wonder why grown-ups lie, why rules are arbitrary, why love sometimes feels conditional. And instead of answers, they're told, "Don't ask too much. Just do as you're told. Why can't you be like the other kids?" So they learn to stay quiet. But inside, the questions never stop. They just grow sharper, heavier. By the time they become adults, they've built entire worlds inside their minds. Worlds filled with unspoken thoughts, unseen truths, and unexplored feelings. But the external world doesn't welcome that. At work, they're told to follow scripts. In relationships, they're told they're too intense. On social media, they're told to just be positive. And so they hide again. Not because they want to, but because they've learned what happens when they don't. Carl Jung believed that society fears what it doesn't understand. And deep thinkers, they are deeply misunderstood. When you express a complex idea, people think you're showing off. When you sit in silence, they think you're judging them. When you talk about trauma, they think you're being dramatic. When you ask questions, they say you're overthinking. But you're not overthinking. You're seeing clearly. You're observing what others miss. and you're feeling what others are afraid to feel. And that makes people uncomfortable, not because you're wrong, but because you're right. You speak truths that others spend their whole lives avoiding. You bring light to shadows they've kept buried. You remind them that something is missing, and that reminder is painful. That's why deep thinkers are often met with resistance, mockery, or distance, not because of who they are, but because of what they represent. A mirror to all that's been suppressed. Jung called this the encounter with the shadow, and most people don't want to meet their shadow, so they reject the person who reflects it. That person is often you. Have you ever tried to warn someone? To tell them a hard truth before it was too late? To help them see a pattern that was destroying them? And instead of gratitude, you got silence, or anger, or ghosted completely. You weren't being negative, you were being real. But real is dangerous. Real doesn't sell. Real doesn't entertain. Real makes people think. And thinking hurts. Jung said that most people don't think. They just rearrange their prejudices. They repeat what they've heard. They defend what they've been taught. They perform. But deep thinkers, they question. They deconstruct. They reconstruct. They stay up at night, wrestling with contradictions. They don't seek approval. They seek understanding. And in doing so, they often lose the approval of those who live on the surface. That's the tragedy of awareness. The more you awaken, the more isolated you become. Not because you're broken, but because everyone else is asleep. And yet, you still try to connect. You try to dim your light to make others comfortable. You try to soften your words so you don't scare them. You try to fit in. But it never works. Because truth has a frequency. And once you vibrate at that level, you can't go back to pretending. So what do you do? Where do you go? How do you live in a world that fears the very thing you are? That's what we explore next. If you've ever felt like you were too much for the world, you weren't wrong. You weren't broken. You were simply born into a system that was never designed to support depth. Carl Jung called it mass-mindedness. It's the idea that most people don't think independently. They don't explore the truth for themselves. They simply absorb what culture gives them, without questioning if it's real, if it's right, or if it's even theirs to believe. From the moment you enter this world, you're handed a script. You're told what's good, what's bad, what success means, what failure looks like. You're taught to compete, to obey, to smile even when you're sad, to be nice even when someone disrespects you. And if you follow that script, the world applauds. It calls you mature, successful, well-adjusted. But if you question it, if you ask, why are we doing this? If you say, this doesn't feel right to me, suddenly you're the problem. You're told you're too sensitive, too intense, too negative, too difficult. But here's what Jung knew. You're not to anything. You're just awake. And the world fears what's awake. Let's go deeper. Think about your earliest experiences with the education system. Were you rewarded for creativity? For emotional insight? For philosophical thinking? Or were you rewarded for memorizing the right answers? For sitting still? For being quiet, even when something inside you wanted to scream? School, for most deep thinkers, is the first place they feel the suffocating weight of conformity. You sit in rows. You're told what to think, when to speak, what's right and wrong, based not on truth, but on authority. The world doesn't want you to think deeply. It wants you to follow. Because followers are profitable. Followers are predictable. Followers don't disrupt the system. Carl Jung saw it clearly. A system that discourages inner exploration is a system built on fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of truth. Fear of the human soul. And that fear becomes culture. It becomes the way we date. Where surface-level attraction is rewarded over emotional resonance. It becomes the way we work, where status and productivity are prioritized over meaning and fulfillment. It becomes the way we live, rushing, chasing, scrolling, never stopping to ask, is this even what I want? Jung believed that the soul is not meant to move at the speed of modern life. It needs space, silence, stillness, shadow. But deep thinkers don't just seek that space. They create it. And when they do, the people around them feel uncomfortable. Why? Because they've been taught to fear silence, to run from introspection, to associate stillness with laziness. When a deep thinker walks into a room, they carry a certain presence, a stillness that's not empty, but full, a gaze that doesn't just look, but sees. And people feel that. They feel seen. And for those who've spent their entire lives hiding from themselves, being seen is terrifying. So they push the deep thinker away, not out of malice, but out of self-protection. This is why many deep thinkers are labeled as loners or weird. Not because they are, but because they live at a frequency most people aren't tuned into. Carl Jung said, "Loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." That line hurts, doesn't it? Because you know it's true. How many times have you wanted to talk about something real? Something about meaning, trauma, life, death, purpose, only to be met with silence or small talk? How many times have you seen through someone's mask and said nothing because you knew they couldn't handle it? How often have you had to dull yourself down just to be understood? That's not connection. That's survival. And surviving in a world that doesn't understand depth comes at a cost. You begin to doubt yourself. You start thinking, maybe I am the problem. Maybe I am too sensitive. Maybe I should just stop thinking so much. But don't. Please, don't. Because the moment you abandon your depth is the moment you abandon your soul. And Jung would never want that for you. He believed that the world's greatest hope lies in individuals brave enough to remain conscious in an unconscious society. Brave enough to keep questioning, even when it hurts. Brave enough to stay awake, even when sleep looks so tempting. You are that hope. But let's be real. Being a deep thinker doesn't make life easier. It makes it harder. Because you don't get to pretend. You don't get to lie to yourself. You don't get to ignore the ache in your chest when things don't align. You feel everything. The beauty, the tragedy, the chaos, the silence. And in a world that tells you to numb, to scroll, to move on, feeling is rebellion. So rebel. If you're a deep thinker, there's a good chance you've walked through life wondering, why do I always feel so tired? Not physically, but mentally, spiritually. You enter a room and sense the tension before anyone speaks. You listen to someone talk, and you don't just hear their words. You hear the pain behind them. You hear the things they don't say. And somehow, by the end of that interaction, you feel like the air's been sucked out of you. But they feel better, calmer, lighter. And you're left asking yourself, why do people always come to me for support, but disappear when I need someone? Carl Jung called this phenomenon projection and unconscious vampirism. Let's unpack that. In psychological terms, projection is when someone attributes their own unresolved issues, emotions, or desires onto another person. And deep thinkers, they're like open canvases. People feel safe projecting onto them because they're calm, they're empathetic, they're self-aware. But here's the danger. When you're constantly absorbing the emotional weight of others, you slowly start to disappear. Your own thoughts get clouded. Your own voice gets quieter. Your own needs become blurry. And the worst part? No one notices. Because you're the strong one, the calm one, the one who always seems to have it together. But inside, you're exhausted. This is how the world drains deep thinkers, silently, subtly, systematically, not through violence, but through dependency. Relationships become one-sided. Conversations become therapy sessions. Friendships become emotional rescue missions. And over time, you lose something vital. Yourself. Carl Jung believed that the world doesn't just ignore deep thinkers. It uses them because people are drawn to depth. But they're also afraid of it. So instead of honoring it, they extract it. They take your insight. They take your calm. They take your energy. But they rarely give it back. And when you finally pull away, when you set a boundary, when you say, I need space, they call you selfish, or cold, or distant. But what they don't see is that your silence isn't rejection. It's survival. You're not cold you're recharging. Because being awake in an unconscious world is draining, especially when that world is designed to keep you distracted. Let's talk about media. The average person sees thousands of ads per day, each one carefully engineered to tell you, you're not enough. Buy this, fix that, chase this ideal. And if you're a deep thinker, you see the manipulation. You notice how beauty is sold as worth, how fear is used to sell safety, how attention is hijacked, not earned. But here's the trap. Even when you know it's a lie, it still wears you down. Because deep thinkers don't just consume information. They process it. They analyze it. They internalize it. And that takes energy. So much more energy than most people realize. Even scrolling social media isn't passive for a deep thinker. Every post, every headline, every image, it all triggers reflection. It all activates questions. Why is everyone pretending to be happy? Why does no one talk about grief, about shame, about fear? Why is vulnerability edited out of our lives like it's shameful? Jung believed that the collective unconscious shapes society more than logic. And right now, that unconscious is afraid of depth. So the systems we live in, from schools to media to work, are designed to suppress it. They tell you, don't slow down, don't ask why, don't sit with your sadness, just keep going. But deep thinkers, they can't just keep going. Not blindly, not without asking, what does any of this mean? So they pause, they reflect, they feel, and the world punishes them for it. In school, they're labeled as distracted or daydreamers. At work, they're seen as too philosophical or not productive enough. In relationships, they're told they're too intense or too emotional. But what they really are is real. And in a society built on performance, being real is a radical act. But radical acts come with consequences. You lose friends, you lose promotions, you lose invitations, because you refuse to play the game. You refuse to flatter egos. You refuse to pretend everything's fine. You refuse to smile when something inside you is breaking. And that refusal is powerful. But it's also lonely. Carl Jung said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." You are awake. But the price of awakening is isolation. Still, there is hope, because there are others like you, scattered across the world, also observing, also thinking, also waiting for someone to say the thing everyone's been afraid to admit. And when two deep thinkers meet, really meet, the world changes a little. The illusion cracks. The truth breathes. The soul feels less alone. So don't shut yourself off. Don't numb your insight just to be accepted. There comes a moment in every deep thinker's life where they ask, is it worth it? Is it worth seeing what others refuse to see? Is it worth carrying thoughts too heavy to say out loud? Is it worth feeling this much when so few understand? Carl Jung believed that moment is not a breakdown. It's a beginning, because that's when you decide to shrink back and conform, or to expand into your truth, even if it means walking alone. The world will not ask you to do this. In fact, it will beg you not to. It will offer comfort in exchange for your silence. It will praise you for fitting in. It will reward your numbness with applause. But deep down, you'll know that kind of life, it isn't living, it's surviving. And surviving isn't enough for someone like you. You were born with a mind that refuses to be tamed, a heart that refuses to go numb, a soul that can't pretend. That is not a weakness. That is your calling. Jung said that we each carry within us a task, a psychological destiny, and the deeper the thinker, the more sacred the task. Not everyone is meant to go inward, to confront the shadow, to walk into the fire of the self and come out changed. But you are, and it's not a comfortable path. There's no map, no cheering crowds, no clear finish line. Some days you'll feel lost. Others, you'll feel cursed. But listen closely. That emptiness you sometimes feel, it's not failure. It's space. Space for something greater to emerge. Because when you stop being what the world expects, you start becoming who you truly are. And that's when your life begins. Here's what they don't tell you. Deep thinkers are not here to be understood by the many. They're here to awaken the few. Maybe you're not meant to be liked by everyone. Maybe you're meant to be a mirror, to show people what they've forgotten, to speak what others are afraid to say. And yes, that comes with solitude. But solitude is not the same as loneliness. Loneliness is feeling unseen. Solitude is finally seeing yourself. And when you do, really do, you'll stop chasing the world's approval. You'll stop begging to be chosen. You'll stop bending your truth to be digestible, because you'll realize you were never too much. You were simply too real for a world that thrives on pretending. Jung believed that once we embrace our inner complexity, we become medicine, not in a grand, heroic way, but in quiet ways. The way we listen deeply, the way we hold space, the way we refuse to look away. You don't need to become a guru, or write a book, or fix the world. You just need to stay awake, to honor your depth, to stop apologizing for who you are. That, in itself, is revolutionary. And slowly, the right people will find you. The ones who crave depth, the ones who think in metaphors, who see symbols in dreams, who ask why before they ask how much. Those people are out there, and they're searching for someone like you. someone who makes them feel less alone in their thoughts, less alien in their truth, less broken in their beauty. But they'll only find you if you stop hiding. So let the world misunderstand you. Let them call you too serious, too emotional, too intense. Smile gently and go even deeper, because the truth is, this world needs you, not the filtered you, not the toned down you, not the agreeable, smile-on-demand version of you. It needs your rawness, your questions, your silence, your courage. Carl Jung believed that only when individuals transform themselves can society truly evolve. And who transforms society? Not the loudest, not the richest, not the trendiest, but the most conscious, the ones who dare to go within and come back with light. That's you. So stop asking for permission to be real. Stop waiting for the world to value you. Start valuing yourself so deeply that others have no choice but to rise or leave. And both outcomes are okay, because deep thinking is not about being liked. It's about being true to yourself, to your soul, to your reason for being here. And now, if this video made you feel seen, if these words echoed something inside you, that ache you've never been able to explain, then let's keep this space alive. Like this video so it reaches more people like us. Comment below with just one word that describes how you truly feel right now. I read every single one. Subscribe and stay close, because here, you'll never have to apologize for your mind. And if this gave you value, consider sending a super thanks to support more real, raw, honest content. The world may hate deep thinkers, but in time, they'll realize we were the ones trying to save it. Silently, lovingly, relentlessly, even when no one noticed. Until now.